Joe Rogan discusses UFO researchers claiming the 1947 Roswell crash was a donation. Julian Assange freed from prison after reaching a plea deal over leaking US classified documents. Elena Danaan has some tantalizing information about the Earth Alliance collaborating with different galactic organizations. Dr. Garry Nolan appears to be embracing the cryptoterrestrial hypothesis in recent statements picked up by mainstream media sources. General Stephen Whiting, who heads US Space Command, discusses its priorities and international partnerships. More scientists are actively exploring the feasibility of superluminal warp drive propulsion systems. The redacted interview covers alien false flag implications of the amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act for 2025, making enrollment in the Selective Service System in the US automatic. These stories and more in Exopolitics Today, the Week in Review.
You're listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla, your source for the uncensored truth regarding the human, extraterrestrial, global, and political agenda. Click the like button and subscribe to this channel. And now, here's Dr. Michael Salla.
Welcome to the Week in Review for June 29th. So we actually have quite a few stories to cover, so let me get right into it. This is Joe Rogan in an interview with a retired Navy SEAL, Jack Carr, and they're discussing UFO researchers. I don't know if you would call Garry Nolan a UFO researcher, but definitely a scientist with interests in the UFO phenomenon. And Diana Pasolkis is a religious studies scholar who is also interested in the UFO phenomenon. And so they went to the Roswell crash site in New Mexico in 1947 to look at that. And Joe Rogan had something that was very interesting to say. So I just want to play that clip for you. We're just going to play the first 30 seconds or so from that clip.
They don't even think they're crashing like as an accident. They think some of them they're just sending down here. Like, hey, figure that out, stupid.
Oh, man.
Send them to some remote place, slam it down there, and then the government has to rope off the area. And you can still find parts in this one area of New Mexico where this one crash site was.
Okay, so they called these recovered craft donations. And now that's very, very interesting. Now, because that is suggesting that the extraterrestrials didn't quite crash there, that they arranged for their craft to crash, but it was like a process, a donation. And so this is not a new theory. This is something that has been bandied about for some time. One of the sources that has talked about this, and he gives the earliest date for a donation, one of these extraterrestrial craft crashing, ostensibly to benefit the US military in some way. And so the Roswell crash in 1947 is not the first example of a retrieved UFO that falls into this category of a donation. William Tompkins, a retired or former aerospace designer who worked with the US Navy during the Second World War and was part of a debriefing team of US Navy spies in Nazi German aerospace corporations during the World War. He says that the first example of a donation was the 1942 Los Angeles UFO air raid. And he says that what happened was that two of the Nordic craft crashed, that they were unmanned craft, that they were drones, and that they were gifted to the United States military as a kind of countermeasure to Nazi Germany being helped by another group of extraterrestrials, the Draco Reptilians and the Orion Greys. So you have these donations happening because of different extraterrestrial groups battling against one another. So very interesting. I thought it was worth pointing out that the first donation of a craft wasn't in 1947, but actually much earlier, well, 5 years earlier, in 1942, in the Roswell incident. Now, here's a video, a very nice little video that is showing Elena Danaan in her initial abduction case, where she was taken by a group of grey extraterrestrials on one of their spacecraft. She was 9 years old at the time. She was taken on the craft, and they were conducting genetic medical experiments on her. And as part of the process, they placed an implant into her head. And at some point, what occurred was that she was rescued by a group of, so here you have the Greys performing the experiments here, and here she's being rescued by these Nordic-looking humans that came in. So she's talked about this at length in her books. The first book, A Gift from the Stars, talked about that incident at length. But here's a kind of a 10-minute short video of her encounter. And I have no doubt that eventually Elena Danaan's story is going to be picked up and turned into a blockbuster movie, because it is really an incredible story and there is a lot of supporting evidence for it. Now, here's a video that I released back in 2019, and this was from JP, who's currently serving in the US Army, but he sent this to me just before he enlisted in the US Army. Now, prior to this, he had shared with me dozens of photographs and some videos of flying triangles, flying rectangles, flying saucers near MacDill Air Force Base, which is the home of the US Special Operations Command. Now, in this video that he sent me, what he showed in that video, and I'm just going to play it now for you, is a craft, and you probably will be able to see, there it is. It's a cigar-shaped craft. It's an elliptical craft, and it's shaped like one of those Tic Tacs. So here in the video, I'm just kind of moving through it pretty quick, and the cursor is showing where it is. But now we're going to go into some close-ups. There you go. So that's a close-up. So now you can see the craft a little more clearly, and it is a cigar-shaped or Tic Tac-shaped craft. Now, at the time, I think we weren't sure if this was an extraterrestrial craft or if it was something that was part of a secret space program. But what I know, what I've been told, is that some of those smaller cigar-shaped craft are actually part of a secret space program, that they're manufactured by Lockheed Martin. So there you have this cigar-shaped craft. So this is from 2019, and it's a video that got some circulation, but really wasn't picked up by too many sources. But now that JP is serving with the US Army, people are wanting evidence. People are saying, well, if you're seeing or you're participating in all of these classified missions, give us evidence. Well, he has submitted evidence in the past, so this is part of that. So well worth taking a look at that. So that's in the Twitter feed. Here's an interview I did with Timothy Alberino, where we discuss his edited edition, a compilation of the 3 books of Enoch. Now, people might not know that there are actually 3 books of Enoch. People are most familiar with the first book of Enoch, which was discovered in Ethiopia in the 19th century. And it caused a kind of sensation in the scholarly world, in the biblical world. They were really amazed to find this book, and extracts of it or other portions of it were found in the Dead Sea Scrolls that were discovered. It was 1947, I believe. So the Book of Enoch that discusses the situation prior to the Great Flood, where you have these fallen angels and their progeny called the Nephilim being tried or being subjected to scrutiny by a group of angels. And so we talk about that. We talk a little bit about the second book of Enoch, which is the story of Enoch giving 366 books of knowledge to Methuselah, his son, and his other sons, and that their job was to protect this knowledge and ensure that it would be handed down after the coming great flood. And so that's where Timothy makes the case that the book of Enoch is actually the oldest historical text, even predating the Sumerian and the Egyptian text. So that's a pretty controversial claim to make. I think that there's an argument that the book of Enoch does date from the pre-flood era, and I would agree with Timothy in that regard. But whether the book of Enoch, as the Ethiopians had, is actually an accurate rendition of information from the pre-flood era as opposed to the Sumerian accounts, which might be closer to the original Enochian source of that, because we can't assume that the Ethiopian book of Enoch that was written around the 3rd century BC is the more accurate retelling of the flood events that Enoch was subjected to, because the Sumerian texts are thousands of years older than the biblical texts, and so they might be a more accurate retelling of these things. So I think that is where I would part company with Timothy, but nevertheless, I think he does make an important point that the book of Enoch does date from these pre-flood events, and that we get an idea of what happened from there. And the other 2 books of Enoch are definitely worth taking a look at. I know Timothy's not a big fan of books 2 and 3 because book 1, he believes, has a very important prophetic references in terms of Jesus of Nazareth. I think that book 2 is actually, in a way, I think that has in it some really important information about how you had Enoch and his sons gathering together, compiling all of this information in 366 books and preserving that for post-flood generations. And so there's this order of Melchizedek that supposedly was set up to watch over all of that. So I think that information is well worth pursuing. So I would say book 2 is very, very relevant. Book 3, which deals with a Hebrew mystic that participates or has some kind of mystical journey himself, where he encounters Enoch, who has gone through a transformation into this angel called Metatron. I mean, that's quite interesting information, but it is considered part of this kind of like Enoch trilogy. So this is the book that Timothy, or the compilation that Timothy has edited and has recently released. So if you don't have that in your library, then I would definitely consider it, because I think the book of Enoch is very, very important. It has great significance. So I'm very glad that Timothy went to the trouble to come up with an edition and add some commentary to that. Okay, so here we have Julian Assange, and because of some very significant recent developments, he was released. Kind of like almost, it was a big surprise, really. He was released from a British jail. There had been pressure from the Australian government under the Labor government in Australia, which is a kind of left socialist-leaning government, that they actually did put pressure on the United States and on Britain to resolve the Assange case. And so we would assume that Assange's release was due to some significant degree from the pressure of the Australian government. Prime Minister Albanese was very critical in that, as was the Australian ambassador to the United States, a former Prime Minister who was also wanting to get the Assange case resolved. So now Assange had been released. Now WikiLeaks in the past has released some documents dealing with UFOs and extraterrestrial life. Now, whether his incarceration, the many years he spent either in incarceration or prior to that, seeking refuge at the Ecuadorian embassy in London, has really kind of like slowed down the rate of documents being released by WikiLeaks. Now, his release, him now arriving safely in Australia, will he release more of the documents that he received? And I think there are a lot of people that believe that he has a lot more to release that he was holding onto, that WikiLeaks was holding onto, in a way to kind of like ensure that he had some bargaining or some leverage over the United States and Britain. And apparently now that he's safely in Australia, that information can be released. So we'll see what happens. But I'm certainly hopeful that WikiLeaks can now play a very important role in releasing or leaking information concerning this world of special access programs, where you have the UFO issue, extraterrestrials, non-human intelligence being studied, being reverse engineered, genetic experiments, that very highly classified world, that more information can be released about that. Because I think the big problem when it comes to these special access programs is overclassification. Here's a Star Nations news episode from Elena Danaan. So this was June 24, where she had some very interesting information that was given to her by her primary contact from the Galactic Federation of Worlds, which is Thorhan Aredian. And he was talking about how the Earth Alliance is working with the US Navy through the Solar Warden program and with different governments around the world that are part of an Earth Alliance, and how the disclosure process has to proceed very, very carefully, that if the Earth Alliance working with the Galactic Federation releases too much information, then what would happen is that the deep state would distort that information through their assets in the mainstream media and whatever other resources they have in the classified world to make it look very different to what's really going on. So if, for example, you have, say, motherships or flying saucer craft showing up in the skies that are either coming from extraterrestrials, or maybe they're coming from under the earth, from the inner earth beings or cryptoterrestrials, that those craft that would, if the truth were told, would be like, well, this is a wonderful thing. You know, these are our cousins from the inner earth or from outer space. But the danger would be that rather than the truth being told, the deep state, using its influence over the mainstream media, would frame that as some kind of invasion. And so Thorhan Aredian is acknowledging that they are calibrating the disclosure process to ensure that whatever information is released cannot be preempted or distorted by the deep state to create fear among the population. because this is what the deep state is very good at. They've been doing it for a long, long time, and that is creating false flag events, making or turning what might be innocuous events or events that they have arranged into something that fulfills their agenda. Now, here is a scientist / UFO researcher, Dr. Garry Nolan, who's been given a lot of coverage in the mainstream media. And he appeared to be making statements that supported the idea that there were cryptoterrestrials on Earth, that these were non-human intelligence that have been on Earth a long, long time walking amongst us. And so these kind of claims by Dr. Nolan were picked up by a number of newspapers, and here's one, the Irish Star, I guess a Irish version of a tabloid, and he was and they were explaining that he was making the case that the non-human intelligence are here, have been here for a long time, and that things such as orbs are probably part of a planetary defense system. So that's very, very interesting. So, but he does believe that aliens have 100% visited Earth and actually protect humans. I mean, these are some of the ideas. Now, exactly what he has said and how the Irish Star depicted that, there is some kind of liberties that the Irish Star took. And here, Dr. Nolan actually made a comment to my tweet, and he says that supporting an idea is not the same as agreeing it is right. I support the discussion of many ideas while not knowing which is right. So, I mean, what he's doing here is he's saying that, he's got an open mind to many things, and he will discuss it. It doesn't mean he believes that's the right thing, but he's got an open mind and he's willing to discuss that. And I think that's great. That shows that he's open to new ideas. And certainly when we're coming to the extraterrestrial phenomenon, UFOs, that's what you can't really ask much more than people just keep an open mind, don't dismiss possibilities out of hand. And that's what he's doing here. So I think what may have happened is that the Irish Star maybe took liberties with some of the ideas that Dr. Nolan had expressed support for, and put out an article that made it look like he was actually saying that these aliens who visited Earth are actually protecting humans at the moment, which is an idea he says he supports investigating, but he doesn't believe necessarily that it's right. Now, there's a couple of videos, short video clips that I wanted to play to you. Now, these are from a General Stephen Whiting, who is the head of US Space Command. Now, US Space Command is one of the 11 combatant commands of the United States military. Now, the US military, or the Pentagon, divides the Earth into 7 geographic domains and 4 functional domains. And Space Command is one of the geographical domains. So, for example, US Northern Command is in charge of coordinating the military forces of the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines in North America, and that includes Canada, Mexico, and the United States. And so you have those kinds of geographical commands. And Space Command takes over at 60 miles above the Earth's, 60 miles in the atmosphere. So 60 miles at an altitude of 60 miles, that is the beginning of space according to international standards. It's also called the von Karman line. So Space Command takes its authority that anything occurring above 60 miles in space, which is about 100 kilometers, is actually under the purview of Space Command. And of course, that goes way, way out there. Anything above that falls automatically under Space Command. So what General Whiting has to say, and he's a 4-star general, what he has to say is very important in terms of what's happening in space. We get a clue from his statements about what could be currently occurring in space. So I wanted to play 2 short video clips that give us an idea of what is happening. So here is the first one, and in it he describes Operation Olympic Defender. So let me play that for you. We'll just play a few seconds. So here we go.
Now, unfortunately, a lot of those agencies are all have the word space in the name, and so it can be confusing who does what. So let me focus on what the unique aspects are, unique contributions are of U.S. Space Command. In fact, if you go to Title 10 of U.S. Code, it actually lays out what the primary duties of a combatant commander are. You can imagine when federal law says your primary duties are, I'm very interested in what follows. And there's 3 points that follow. Number 1, it says my primary duty is to prepare for or to plan for the employment of the armed forces, to execute defense strategies and prepare for military contingencies. So that is job number 1 for us, is preparing operational plans for potential contingencies. Secondly, we are to take actions as necessary to deter conflict. So every day we're watching what's going on in the world and seeing how we can use space to best deter any conflict from happening or escalation from occurring.
Okay, so there you have General Whiting talking about US Space Command running Operation Olympic Defender and some of the countries involved in that and some of the countries that have been invited to join. So what that means is that there is this very important collaboration happening in terms of you got your 4 kind of like countries, US, UK, Australia, Canada, that are a part of that kind of inner circle that are closely collaborating, integrating their military capabilities and personnel when it comes to space operations, and that there's an attempt to expand that by inviting other countries such as Germany, France, and New Zealand to join. So this is the kind of first collaboration that I wanted to draw attention to, but there's much more occurring with a US Space Command. And this is important because earlier on I mentioned Elena Danaan and the Earth Alliance collaborating with extraterrestrial organizations. Well, who is part of the Earth Alliance? Well, this is where we get into what General Whiting has to say to get an idea of that. So we get a clue, or we get a little bit of information from that first clip, but there's a second clip. And in this second clip, he describes 33 nations and over 140 aerospace corporations and international organizations that have signed these, quote, space situational awareness data sharing agreements with US Space Command. So, and he also describes 25 countries that are part of an annual global Sentinel exercise staged at Vandenberg Space Force Base. So I just wanted to play that little clip for you so you can hear in his own words this level of international cooperation happening in space.
So it's not just the joint community, but you mentioned earlier Olympic Defender and working with allies and partners. That's always been a strong suit for the United States. We don't go to war alone. We bring our allies and partners with us. It's a huge force multiplier. I believe you have 33 different international agreements for space situational awareness currently in place. So how does this sort of partnership increase your set of options when addressing threats posed by Russia or China?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Charles. This system of alliances that we have is a unique feature of the U.S. defense enterprise that is not shared by China or Russia, and it makes us stronger. I mentioned earlier, it helps us develop resilience and capacity. It also brings us unique perspectives. Our allies are around the world. They are on every continent, and they give us a perspective about that continent that as we're sitting here in North America, we might not be able to bring ourselves. Sometimes they bring us unique accesses into other countries as well, where they have a relationship with some third country that maybe we don't have, and so that can be beneficial to us as well. we are able to share information, and that's bilateral sharing of information. And then we can develop tactics, techniques, and procedures together. But just to give you the full array of all of our international partnerships, you can think about it as a pyramid. At that base layer are the space situational awareness sharing agreements that you mentioned, Charles. Yes, 30 plus countries plus another 140 companies and international organizations that we've signed these agreements with.
Okay, so right there you have General Whiting explaining that there are these 140 aerospace corporations and organizations, 33 nations that have these space situational awareness data agreements, and also he goes on to describe 25 countries that are part of this global Sentinel exercise. So what does all of that mean? What it does tell us is that the United States Space Command is very active in ensuring the cooperation of other nations that have space programs or that are getting involved in space, and integrating them into both a kind of military architecture or a military hierarchy. And he described the pyramid formation where you have at the bottom level, these kind of like space situational agreements, and then at the very top of that pyramid, you have Operation Olympic Defender, which currently has 4 nations, but other nations have been invited to join. So this, to my mind, is evidence that you do have something along the lines of a concerted effort to get the major spacefaring nations in the world, aside from Russia and China and their special cases, to develop a integrated military and civilian kind of space operations so that they can smoothly interface or deal with extraterrestrials visiting our solar system in a way that is very coordinated, and it's clear who the leading authority is. Because I think this is one of the things that the extraterrestrials have made clear, is that up until recently, it's not clear who is in charge of the Earth in terms of space operations. I mean, there have been competing programs. Nations have their own secret space programs, and corporations have them, intelligence agencies have them. So visiting extraterrestrials thought that this was a big problem. You needed to have some coordination and a top dog. You needed to have someone in charge that could kind of like negotiate agreements and relay concerns. And so that's the role of US Space Command. Now, here is a story concerning information from the representative for the state of Tennessee, for a congressional district in Tennessee, that is Tim Burchett. And he was in talks with the Speaker of the House of Representatives, and he was trying to set up a House Select Committee on UAPs that would have subpoena power, and also that there would be an attempt to have more congressional hearings. Now, this was shut down. This effort to create a House Select Committee on UAPs was shut down because apparently the representative for a congressional district in Ohio, he thought that this would be something that would actually be prejudicial to national security. So I think that the Congress, there are people in Congress that do want to take this further, that they do want to have more information released about what's going on and held congressional hearings, but they're being stymied by those that hold positions of authority within the US Congress. So this, to me, what this shows is that this controlled disclosure process, where you have the US Congress playing a leading role in having disclosure rolled out in an official way so that people can digest it, in a way that's gradual, that's not going to happen. That there are powers, the dark or the deep state, that is shutting this down. Now, why are they shutting this down? I think it's because the deep state understands that they cannot do very much to influence a controlled disclosure process in terms of the overall effect, because they're going to lose power as people become aware of the extent of UFOs, their propulsion systems, their energy systems, and so forth. So what the deep state is trying to do, I think, is set up is to shut all this down, shut disclosure down. And if there is a movement towards catastrophic disclosure, then what they would do is distort that or manage that in a way where a kind of catastrophic disclosure situation like extraterrestrials or inner earth beings showing up and like, here we are, we're real, people seeing their craft in the skies, that would be subverted or twisted in a way that the deep state would say, no, we're under attack. And they would use their assets, and they have still a lot of assets to use that could really pump up fear, that could lead to false flag events. So I think this is why there is this attempt to ensure that the disclosure process is not co-opted by the deep state to further their narrative or their agenda. Okay, so here's a story in the debrief, and that is a online blog site that deals with all manners of classified projects. It's related to Edward Snowden's initial releases, and so there is this attempt to understand what kind of classified programs are happening in the world, in the United States, and to kind of like give us an idea of the extent to these and what's happening. So here's a story. Warp theorists say we've entered an exotic propulsion space race to build the world's first working warp drive. So I think that this article is very good in giving us a kind of overview. So I'll just read out the first paragraph here. An international team of physicists behind several revolutionary warp drive concepts, including the first to require no exotic matter, says that recent unprecedented breakthroughs in physics and propulsion have launched the world powers into a Cold War-style 21st century space race to build the world's first working warp drive. Okay, so that's, I think, really very interesting in terms of noting that many countries, many scientists, many think tanks, universities are suddenly paying attention to the feasibility of warp drives, that some of these can actually achieve superluminal speeds. Now, the thing to keep in mind is that in the debrief article, this is all being proposed as something that is happening now, and that working prototypes will be developed in the near future, or that they're under development now, working prototypes, or some prototypes to just show the feasibility of these things. Now, what that overlooks is that we've got many whistleblowers, insiders, witnesses who have come forward to say that, no, these are not technologies that are being planned for future development and released. These are the technologies that have been secretly developed and implemented decades ago and are used in multiple secret space programs. And if you want definitive proof of that, that is going to always be very, very elusive. At best, you might get a few high-level people with a lot of credentials saying that, well, this is what they saw, this is what they knew. And in some cases, rare cases, you might get photographs, you might get video, like the JP videos that I have released, or the photos that I've released. Now, I think one of the best sources verifying that this has been going on for 4 to 5 decades at the very least is Ben Rich, the former Skunkworks CEO, who at the end of his career, I think he retired in 1987, something like that, that he began to do lectures. And he would go to these lectures and he would declare that we have that Skunkworks has the technology to take ET home. So what that is saying is that this is technology that the Skunkworks has been working on. And one of the things I discussed in several of my books is that in the 1970s, Ben Rich, late 70s, he began lectures saying that Lockheed is presently studying technologies to take ET home, and it was kind of perceived as a joke because the ET movie had been released just a little earlier in the 70s, and so there was this idea that technology could be developed to take ET home, and that was kind of considered a joke. But by the late 80s, what Ben Rich did was that he changed that punchline. Rather than saying, okay, we are studying technologies to take ET home, by the late 1980s, he said that we have the technologies to take ET home. Importantly, he said that it would take an act of God to release this technology to the general public. So what that is saying is that major aerospace companies like Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, Boeing, General Dynamics, that those kind of like A-list aerospace contractors have for many decades been reverse engineering these kinds of advanced propulsion systems that they've recovered from captured extraterrestrial technologies or spacecraft, and that they've built working prototypes, and these prototypes were the foundation for eventual space programs where you actually have functional fleets being used by intelligence agencies, and even some covert operation units like Special Operations Command out of MacDill Air Force Base in Florida. So I think that the idea of warp drive being developed in the future, that these propulsion systems come online, I think that's a cover for the release of these pre-existing technologies that have been around for 40 to 50 years, so that at some point they can be disclosed to the world. And the disclosure would be that, well, this is what these new innovative companies have done, SpaceX, Blue Origins, and so forth, that they have been able to develop and release these technologies. But in fact, the kind of older legacy aerospace companies, that they did that 4 or 5 decades ago. Now, here's an interview I did on Redacted. And in this interview, what I discussed was the National Defense Authorization Act for 2025 having a provision included within it that was passed by the House of Representatives to make the selective service system automatic for males between 18 to 26. And I thought that was very, very interesting. And in the interview with Redacted, I talked about how this was kind of unnecessary for fighting foreign wars, because if you look at Ukraine, if you look at China, you don't need large-scale combat formations to fight these things. What you would need is the Air Force using precision-guided weapons systems, or the Navy doing similarly with their weapon systems, and also with kind of infantry, also with Marine Expeditionary Forces. So it didn't make any sense in terms of existing needs unless there is an attempt to set up a false flag operation where the United States heartland is under attack by a contrived enemy. So in this interview, I talk about who that contrived enemy is. I think it is related to these deep underground military bases, over 120 of them at the very least, and that they have clone armies in there, that these cloned non-human intelligences with hive minds that can be released, and they can attack people or attack cities or towns all over the United States from underground bases, and that would just create havoc. And I think this is what we may face in future in terms of a false flag event, that it wouldn't be an invasion from space, it would be an invasion from these deep underground locations that everyone is confused about. But I think this would be how the deep state would do it, because I think the deep state is very, very, let's just say that they are desperate to make something happen, and this is how they could do it. So well worth watching that interview on Redacted. You can just click the link here on my Twitter feed and it'll take you straight there. So now I move on to an appeal on behalf of one of my colleagues in the Exopolitics Institute, that is Manuel Lameroy, who runs the Exopolitics Institute's certificate program. So people who study complete a number of exopolitics courses, they can gain an exopolitics certificate, or they can gain a diploma. Now, what happened to him, unfortunately, is that his home in Natal province of South Africa was hit by a tornado, and it caused a lot of damage. There's a video walking you through the kind of damage that he received at his home. The upstairs area during the tornado was devastated. You can see there debris, property being destroyed, and so forth. Windows, doors being damaged or being destroyed. So he has suffered, he estimates, around $20,000 in damages. And now he has launched an appeal, a request for assistance, and I endorse that because he is someone that runs the Exopolitics certificate program, and that is very important, because we've had dozens and many dozens, probably approaching 100 now, people who have graduated or who are doing the courses, and it is something that is very helpful for people that want to study exopolitics. So you can go to this website, and the link is in my Twitter feed, and make a donation that will be routed through the Exopolitics Institute. The Exopolitics Institute is a 501c3 organization. I actually set it up in 2006, and it is still running. So it is 18 years now. Pretty soon it'll celebrate its 20th year. Hard to imagine, but it does run the program. So I do endorse that appeal, that if you have some funds that you can spare to help Manuel buy replacements, repair his home, that would be great, because he is a critical person in terms of running the certificate program for the Exopolitics Institute. Now, here is an interview I did with George Kavasilis on the fractal nature of the universal heart soul essence, and he has really unique information to share. Now, I don't want to kind of like go too much into detail about the extent of his information, but I think it's very, very significant that he is a contactee that has had high-level contacts with different extraterrestrial organizations, different ET groups. He also was subjected to an abduction, a military abduction by the Pentagon, where he was taken there, tortured at the Pentagon. This happened around 2004. He met with former President George Herbert Walker Bush, and so his contact experiences was something that the Pentagon were very, very interested in. Now, he has gone through quite an evolution in terms of his interaction with the Galactic Federation. I mean, in the interview, he referred to the Galactic Federation of Light, the Galactic Confederation of Light, and of course, I've been talking about the Galactic Federation of Worlds. So, those are, to my mind, those are different organizations. I think there is an organization, the Galactic Federation of Worlds, which is very much hands-on interventionist, and Elena Danaan is probably one of the best and eloquent spokespersons for the Galactic Federation of Worlds. And I think there is another organization that people have talked about in the past, the Confederation of Planets, that is much more kind of spiritual, non-interventionist, hands-off in terms of interacting with the Earth. So I think those are two very real organizations. Now, where the Galactic Confederation of Light comes from, I'm not quite sure if that's an attempt to kind of rebrand or just another way of referring to the Confederation of Planets. The Confederation of Planets has been talked about for many, many decades. In my 2022 book, I called Galactic Federations, Councils, and Secret Space Programs, I go into this history and talk about different galactic federations, confederations, and so forth that different contactees have talked about and discussed. But I think the important thing from what George had to say is that he had a spiritual experience, an encounter, where he was taken out of body and he connected with what he calls the kind of universal heart-soul fractal. And, and I don't want to try to rephrase everything he says. You need to watch the video so you get his words for what he's describing. But I think his core idea that the universe is a living being, entity with a heart essence, and that we in these physical bodies or avatars are also living beings with a heart essence, and that we are a fractal of this higher universal being. I think he's correct. I mean, I think that is absolutely right. And that is revolutionary in terms of understanding who we are and the potential that we have. And so I think it's well worth investigating his philosophy, his information. And in this interview, we get to discuss that at length. Now, here is something that I thought was very, very interesting. So what I did was I posted the interview of my interview with George Cavassalis on my social media, Twitter, Facebook, Telegram, and so forth. Now, Facebook took it down. And all I did in that announcement was just, really all I did was announce this interview with George Cavassalis and the title of the interview. That's all I did. Extraterrestrial Contact and the Fractal Nature of the Universal Heart Soul Essence interview with George Cavassalis. Now, Facebook or Meta took it down. Why in the world would they take? And they gave me some explanation for it, but unfortunately, it was early in the morning. I clicked a few links to find out what it was that they were doing. But then by the time I tried to go back to the original message, it was gone and I couldn't find it anywhere. But what they said was that the post was taken down for violating their community guidelines. And it's like, well, why in the world was this title offensive? And the only thing I can think of is that, obviously someone within the control system in Facebook, whether it is a human person or whether it's just the algorithms or the AI that has been developed and is now monitoring all of Facebook posts, saw this and decided to remove it because he and his information is a threat. And the only thing that comes to mind is that Facebook or Meta are big supporters of artificial intelligence and transhumanism. Now, the information George Cavassalis has is the antithesis of that. And I think his information is probably the starkest antithesis to the whole transhumanist agenda that I found anywhere among any contactee. And maybe that, to my mind, is why he was flagged. But we're going to do a follow-up interview. We're going to talk about this. We're going to talk about AI, transhumanism, and so forth. So yeah, he is really a fascinating researcher and contactee, George Kavasilis. So that is it for the Week in Review for June 29. I want to thank you for watching and appreciate your support for Exopolitics Today, the Week in Review. I look forward to seeing you next week. Aloha.
You have been listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Join or start a conversation in the comments. Take the time to explore the vast library of best-selling books, webinars, and podcasts by Dr. Salla. Visit exopoliticstoday.com.